Hi, Azeez. Welcome to Network Capital. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I know we last met at Harvard Business School, where
That's right.
I was there for the India Summit, and now a few months hence, here we are. So,
That's
tell us a bit about your journey. What do you do today? And then I'm going to try and connect the dots with you in the next 45 minutes.
Sure. Hi, Utkarsh. Thanks for having me here, first of all. I've been a sort of big fan of the Network Capital community and a big sort of enthusiastic member as well. And NC has obviously sort of helped us all connect with interesting people, hire interesting people, all of those things. So glad to be here. As for me, what I do now is head strategy and digital work at Pratham. Pratham has been one of India's largest non-profits working on education, and that's essentially what I am. I'm somebody who wants to work on challenging problems, and I think the biggest problem today is education in India. So that's what I'm doing now. Before that, I've been a reluctant engineer, a management consultant, so gone through the gamut before sort of coming on to what I'm doing now.
Okay. What was childhood like? When did you first decide to take up engineering, and what was the thought process like?
Sure. So I sort of went to engineering. I went to IIT Delhi, and the thought process there was actually not very unique. It was sort of a lot of people were doing engineering, and I was part of the herd. I actually, even at that point, felt that economics might be a better fit for me. But just given a lot of the things that were happening, and a lot of my friends who were going to engineering just sort of went along there. At the same time, I knew even when I joined that I had no intention of actually being an engineer. I've always thought that engineering is about building some sort of dam. Or some sort of bridge, and that to my mind has made it very uncool indeed.
Were you a mechanical or a civil engineer?
I was a mechanical engineer, industrial engineer actually. But yeah, so some of this never sort of appealed to me. For me, my mind always sort of focused more on how people worked rather than how things or machine worked.
Right.
So I think for me, the mechanical side of it didn't appeal to me. But I think what IIT did definitely give me and proved to be a sort of complete blessing sort of to go to IIT was a real grounding in leadership, real grounding in working with really strong peers. So I think it sort of turned out quite well. Mm-hmm. But I remember when I first went to IIT, I was quite sort of sure that I would hate it and not enjoy myself, and wondering why I hadn't gone to Stephens, for example, to do economics.
Right.
So it was a strange sort of twist of many things that brought me to engineering.
Then, was there any pressure of any kind to take up engineering, which was not, say, friend pressure, but say from any other angle?
I think not really. So my parents were both civil servants, and I spent a lot of my childhood in sort of different smaller cities in India. Then I was sort of in the capital city of Chandigarh, where my parents were based. And I think there was no real pressure on necessarily doing engineering. It was just that in India, I think it's very hard to look beyond, say, something like engineering or medicine. Economics is something that often people do. But I think in general, sort of the IITs have become such a brand and have become such a straightforward path that anyone who feels that that they're striving for excellence does try to do that, and once if they've got an opportunity to go there, do end up going. So I think this pressure was more sort of like the ecosystem as a whole and sort of peer group doing all of this rather than anything else.
Right. And they say that first you do engineering and then you sort of figure out your life.
Yeah.
So was that the case for you? Like you mentioned that you were briefly interested in economics.
Yeah.
But were you, like when you came to IIT, you might have taken some liberal arts subjects. But I'm interested in understanding a little more about the 4 years that you spent at IIT.
Sure.
What were they like in a little more detail?
Yeah.
And did you think going into IIT that those 4 years will turn out the way they did?
Yeah, to answer the last part of that, no, absolutely not. I went into IIT thinking that I'll get these 4 years done and then I'll go off to IIM. And that was sort of the straight, again, path for someone from...
A lot of our listeners are not from India.
Sure.
So IIM is Indian Institute of Management, which is a management school, a set of management schools in India.
Correct. So, I mean, my view was, just get done with your education, go to engineering, then do management, and then go on, right? So I think that was the thought when I came in. I think at IIT engineering really broadened my horizons in number of ways. I think one is that the IITs have a large range of liberal arts courses as well. So there's a strong humanities and social science stream. And I actually took most of my electives there. I think 30-40% of my courses were in that stream. And that really exposed me to things like sociology, literature, a lot of other things which I feel are sort of more relevant to what I'm doing now than, say, core engineering. So that opened my mind up. The other thing was that IIT had a very sort of vibrant ecosystem for extracurricular activities, for leadership activities. So I was involved in debate, in public speaking, in sports activities, in student government. So I was doing a range of these things, and those gave me a training in leadership, which I think is sort of very hard to get. In terms of leading very strong people, managing these folks towards particular pursuits, whether it's organizing a college festival or whether it's sort of competing for an intra-college trophy or inter-college competitions. And I think that sort of, I remember there were experiences in IIT which gave me the confidence that I could go out and do anything. And that confidence persists with me today, and I think is invaluable today if I'm trying to tackle a problem like solving India's education crisis. Probably if I did not have that confidence, I would sort of have left that field a long time ago. So I think all of that was a key part of that, and I think then of course taking me to consulting as the next step. I hadn't really heard of McKinsey or something of that sort before that, but while I was there interacting with many people who were sort of trying to go into that sphere, definitely pushed me towards that aspect.
Yeah, no, we're about to come to consulting, but I want to stay a little more on the 4 years. What was hard at IIT for you?
I think what was hard was, I think definitely the academics was challenging. I think in terms of working on something that I did not like at all. So having to do sort of core courses which were very boring for me. And I think when I later went to HBS, I think the transition at Harvard was very, very different, and where I was doing something I enjoyed. So at IIT, I think that was definitely a major challenge for me. But I think everything else was really good in terms of picking up new skills. And I think, again, that was a challenge in the beginning. I remember when I first went to IIT, I was quite a nerdy kid in high school, like many people who try to do engineering are. And if I used to get up in front of a crowd or in front of a classroom, I remember my legs used to shake. And in IIT, in the first 6 months or something, that happened all the time, and I tried to get into debating and public speaking. And then things sort of improved to the point where I became quite a regular.
Why did you start to debate when you came to IIT? Or get less nerdy, so to speak.
Sure. Well, I think the fortunate thing was that if you don't like academics, right, you got to do something else. So I think if you've decided already that I'm just going to sort of do some particular courses I like and the rest are sort of something to get through, you have to figure out something else. But more than that, I'd always been a pretty sort of, I think I'd always liked thinking deeply about subjects. I'd always been very curious about things. And I think that curiosity is still is a very guiding sort of core feature of what I am today. And I think debating really fed well into both of those things. I think we were sort of delving very deeply into subjects and trying to make sense of them and having head-to-head confrontation and sort of verbal arguments on this. And I think that I enjoyed. I remember for the first time, I think, in my life, I remember sort of if I was in a movie, just my mind used to go away from the movie to the debate argument that I'd been having the previous night. And I think that was the first time when I really sort of felt that a particular passion for a subject very, very deeply, or for a particular activity very deeply. And then I think that helped me decide also that I'd probably want that feeling for what I do in my life eventually going forward. And I'm happy to say that feeling is something I have now. But that was the first time I actually ever saw it in my debating days.
Was the classroom particularly stimulating, or the environment outside classroom?
I think the environment outside was very stimulating. All said and done, I think the peer group was exceptional, and in different ways. So there were some people who were sort of more suave, more sophisticated, came from the bigger cities, and sort of had a lot of exposure to different things. There were people who came from small cities and got a very different perspective of, say, small town India, rural India, who were maybe much more street smart than some of us who were from Delhi, and who sort of understood the real world and how it functioned better. So I think getting together in this sort of group of people from different sort of income backgrounds, from different regional backgrounds, I think that was quite fascinating to sort of be a part of. And even now, some of my closest friends are my batchmates, and many of them I see are doing very, very interesting things. Just by virtue of the fact that they sort of came from so many different sort of spheres of backgrounds. Many are entrepreneurs, some are in the corporate sector, some are in social impact. And so I think that really sort of helped me become sort of much more rounded and holistic as a person, from someone who had sort of seen my parents in the civil service, had seen a particular life, had been in Delhi, to many different types of people.
This is just a thought experiment. How do you think IIT is a diverse place intellectually? We know that gender is not probably representative of the ideal. but intellectually, do you think it's a diverse place? And if yes, then how do you think it is the case? Because is diversity a function of an exam that tests a few subjects?
Yeah.
Is it something that you built in and design?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand any place with a high barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Can it be a diverse place without design?
Sure. I think that's a really interesting question, and forces me to think. I think, unfortunately, from the gender point of view, I think definitely it's not as diverse as it should be by any means. I think in our batch we had sort of 15% of the class was female, and I definitely think we missed out. The whole class missed out on a very different perspective.
Yeah.
In a large sort of number of cases. For me, luckily my girlfriend was from IT, and sort of we married later, and so I could get some of that
I
perspective.
met her as well with you
That's
a few
right.
months back.
That's right. So Shruti was, I think, for me, sort of played a role in getting me to interact a lot with that different sort of different context, different understanding of the world in some way, sometimes, right? In some cases. And I think a lot of people sort of lack that coming out of IT. So I think that's definitely a sad part of the experience. That said, I think in terms of, if you look at people from different regions, from different professions, the fact that there's a particular exam and that does not sort of depend on income of people who are coming, maybe on the family background of people who are coming. So given that those things are out of the equation, it tends to, I think in that way there is a diversity that comes in. So people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religions, different regions. And I think in that way the perspective becomes different, as opposed to maybe some other places where, for example, you might have to pay a lot to get in, and then all of a sudden you're sort of basically cutting out anyone below a particular level. So in that way we did see quite a fair bit of diversity, but of course we didn't necessarily have the best thinkers from the liberal point of view, liberal arts point of view, from the business point of view. Mm-hmm. And I think Harvard in that way was sort of exceptional. Right. In that perspective.
So, so if you obviously neither of us is an expert on this subject, but do you think the kind of diversity that any high barrier technical institution has,
correct,
is it? Do you think it happens by design or by default?
I think any diversity that is there in this sort of case, more or less, definitely happens by default. I mean, by design,
because there's no effort, right? There's an
exam.
No
effort. There's no shaping of a class, right? Like in international organizations, you sort of shape a class.
Yeah.
You say that this person is from this region, from this background, from this profession, and you bring them in that way, and then you make sure that there are a lot of different sort of perspectives come in, right? And that's a fascinating part of being in this sort of thing. I think, in India, often this is sort of by default, and if you're lucky, you might sort of stumble upon a group which is more diverse, and if you're unlucky, then you could sort of end up hanging out with sort of people that you might have grown up with, or never sort of differing from that path at all.
Yeah, and peer effects are so important.
Peer effects are incredibly important, and I think for me one of the most sort of fortuitous things that happened was being somehow, and in IT they throw you into hostels just randomly, more or less.
That is also random, exactly.
It's completely random, right? So, and the people you stay with for 4 years in terms of sharing a room with or being neighboring room with makes a lot of difference. For me, I think one of the lucky things was that I happened to be thrown into this dorm or hostel, right? Which had a culture of mentorship, where sort of your seniors would mentor you and where you would all sort of strive together to win particular trophies, whether it's cultural, sort of extracurricular trophies or sports trophies. And we were really into it at that time. Right now, looking back, it seems pretty laughable in the sense of none of this really mattered, right? Like, what did anything that we did, how did it matter in sort of to the broader world? But I think at that time we got into it a lot, and I think the peer effects and the culture of this sort of thing really, I think, creates a mentality and a mindset. So out of my sort of group of friends, many of them have started very successful companies now. Mm-hmm. Some have gone on to sort of premier MBAs or Rhodes scholarships or many other things. And I think just being part of that group that drove each other on and sort of that both supported each other, but also by example, you could see that they're doing all of these things, made a big difference. And I could see that there were pockets within the college who were sort of all driving each other on. For example, if you look at the premier consultancies and who joins there, maybe all of these people would be friends or would know each other. And so if you're part of the lucky group, then you get that advantage. But if you're not part of that lucky group, then you sort of get left behind. And I could see many students who were embittered, who felt that they were part of this out group and all of that as well. So I think peer effects make a big difference. And even in terms of the diversity that you get, I think sort of it happens by luck a little bit.
Right. So 4 years you spent doing a lot of leadership development. Did you think about your career during the 4 years?
Yeah.
And did you end up doing something that you truly cared about?
Yeah, so for me, I think even as I went into IIT, at the back of my mind, I always had this feeling that I would end up trying to do something socially impactful. And that was sort of a very clear part of my value system, a very clear part of my being.
From early on?
From early on. So
okay.
My parents are civil servants in the IAS and in the Indian Police Service. And sort of that's why we've grown up a little bit in smaller towns and seen poverty firsthand. But more than that, have discussed a lot of this stuff over dining table, right? So dining table conversations were very different from sort of standard things. We were discussing these issues day by day. And at the same time, sort of the feeling was that, of course, things are bad, but there's always some hope associated with this, that things are getting better and will get better.
Right.
So I think that sort of mindset is important to have for someone in social impact. You have to feel the urgency, but also you can't get depressed, because if you get depressed, there's enough to depress you for a lifetime, right? So I think that feeling was always in the back of my mind. It wasn't clear whether the path to follow is government as a way of impact, or the private sector, or civil society. And because I wasn't sure what to do, I think I just basically kicked the can down the road by going for McKinsey. I think it was a very standard path, very standard way in which people kick the can down the road. But the idea was that let me sort of go into the business world. Get a top-down view of institutions, see how organizations actually work, learn a little bit, and then I can transition into something that's more impactful.
Right.
And so then that's when I sort of started prepping for consulting, started talking to people who were working consulting.
Did you consider being a civil servant at all?
I did, but I think after I came to engineering college, I think those thoughts sort of receded a little bit into the background.
Why?
I think from what I saw and some of the experiences I had there, and in terms of the people I talked to, even from the news I read, I saw that in India, at one point, maybe 30, 40 years ago, the biggest realistic ways to impact were through the government. So if you did want to make a big change, the government was the sure shot, sort of maybe one of the only ways of doing it. I think over time, since India liberalized and all of that, I think we could see that the private sector is doing a lot, and civil society is doing a lot as well. And then when I studied and I saw and I talked to people, I felt that in many ways the solutions are not necessarily there. And I think while government can scale up solutions really well, but I think it's hard for government to innovate. And for me, especially given that I'm quite a curious person by nature, for me figuring out how this would work, like how do you get a child to learn basic educational skills, or say in any other sector, right? A parallel problem. I didn't think the solutions are there. And so for me, the main thing was, can I come up with that solution and then get government to sort of take that up? And that's when I think I finally decided that rather than the civil service, where I would do a lot of things, but a range of things, let me look more into education, which is something that I was quite passionate about at that time. Government wouldn't offer me a chance to work on education throughout my career. The private sector would. And so let me work on that and try to create something really meaningful.
When did you start preparing for consulting, or made up your mind to join consulting?
So I made up my mind that consulting was going to be a sort of probably my top choice in terms of professions in my third year, and I was lucky again to have a group of sort of friends and mentors who had gone into consulting in the past, who could sort of tell me what the profession was about, but what also the interview process and so on was about, and sort of prepped for those interviews. Was lucky to sort of get an offer at McKinsey and came there. And again, the reason for choosing McKinsey at that point was that I had sort of surveyed this quite a bit.
Did you have multiple offers from consulting firms?
I did.
Okay.
I did. So I had offers from Bain and BCG as well. And it was sort of quite, the day one process at IITs is quite tricky, but sort of managed to, once I got an offer from sort of McKinsey, I think.
So you start preparing in final year?
You start preparing towards the end of the third year and in the beginning of the fourth year, and essentially in the final year, the fourth year, in December you have your interviews. So you spend 4-5 months essentially sort of working with your study groups, prepping case studies, trying to figure out sort of the fit interview, the case interview, and I think that process, by the way, is frankly very enjoyable. Essentially, the prep that you do is not to mug up some list of things, but essentially to discuss business problems and try to get to the bottom of them. Again, something that appealed to the curious thinker in me and sort of helped me also realize that consulting is probably a good career choice in the beginning. And when I was doing this prepping, we also did a lot of research into different consulting firms, came up with your top choices. McKinsey had this PPT that talked about all the exit options that their alumni had and where all they had gone. And in that list, I saw Pratham, I saw the Public Health Foundation of India, I saw the Government of India, I saw some MP offices, I saw the Ashoka Fellowship. And that really sort of swung it for me, because I could see that this is an organization that is going to probably help me go where I eventually want to go and is probably happy to help me go where I want to go. The objective is not that you stay here and you continue with us and you make partner and all that. I mean, obviously that's good if you want to do it, but if you want to, we'll give you a sort of stepping board into creating a lot of social impact. And so I sort of fought very hard to
get in, so that you could have this exposure. How many people are there at IIT in one class?
Around 700.
And how many get into McKinsey roughly?
So 3 people a year or so get into McKinsey at that point.
And similar for other other top consulting firms.
Absolutely.
So it's obviously a fairly competitive process.
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, your partner is also a consultant, right?
Yes, Shruti was at Bain. So in fact, we both went through that process together, and both of us sort of went into consulting. That's right.
Right. And how were the 2 years at consulting? Was it what you thought it was?
Yes. So I think consulting, I think all said and done it was. I hadn't gone in with these rosy tinted sort of glasses thinking that, I'd gone in thinking that consulting was going to be a 2-year gig for me, where I'm going to learn a lot and I'll be able to sort of figure out where to go after that in terms of this impact I want to create. And I think it sort of fulfilled every bit of that. What I loved about consulting at McKinsey was the intellectual problem solving, the rigor of problem solving, the discussions, the fact that we are dealing with sort of some important problems and we're trying to figure out solutions for them. So in terms of analytics, in terms of problem solving, I think it gives you a really good sort of grounding. It also gives you a view of sort of top-down view of organization that you otherwise wouldn't hope to get at 22, I feel. I think it's hard to sort of, normally people join organizations at a particular sort of entry level. In consulting, even though you're sort of entry level in the consulting firm, but with a client, you are sort of dealing with their CXO level officers or CEO level officers. And I think that helps you understand the organization as a whole, what are the levers that you can pull to really make an organization better and bigger. Mm-hmm. So I think those things I loved. The peer group was fantastic, and I continue to believe that some of the people I worked with there are among the best people I worked with at any point. So those things were great. I think in terms of the other good thing it did was also to convince me that for me the corporate sector wasn't the way going forward. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe if I hadn't done McKinsey, I would always have had in the back of my mind that do I want to sort of go into a McKinsey, go into Google, go somewhere else. The grass is always greener, and obviously the compensation is also greener. So all of these things, but I think my time there definitely convinced me that for me a social impact route is probably going to be a much more fulfilling life.
Right. Let's come back to the diversity point that we touched upon earlier. McKinsey also is a high barrier to entry place. You said 3 people from your college get in roughly a year.
Absolutely.
So are high-profile management consulting firms diverse? Yeah. If yes, is it by design or is it by default? I'm obviously not asking you to comment on one specific firm. I'm asking you for a generic scenario.
So I think in general, if you look at management consulting, no, I don't think that they are diverse, or at least close to as diverse as they should be. I think they're more diverse than say the IITs, and they try to do that by design. So for example, McKinsey during my time was going more and more towards hiring from many different colleges. So when they came in, they only used to hire from the IITs. And then they expanded that to, in my batch, we had people from NLS, from National Law School, from St. Xavier's and St. Stephen's, from LSR. So from a range of colleges and people, we had chartered accountants. So we had people sort of at least from a sort of academic background had different types of contexts. That said, the number of women as compared to men was much lower. I think obviously there's a huge skew automatically in the selection process of getting people who are suave, who can talk well. And so in that way, sort of we all ended up being a particular type of person sort of who can be convincing, who can be good in interviews, who can be smooth. And so we might have left out the type of person who is super smart otherwise, maybe extremely good emotionally, maybe extremely good quantitatively, but can't show those skills in a particular interview. So I think that all I think made a play in the fact that if there were people who are not part of the sort of male from IIT type of group, life tended to be quite hard for people who are not in that group. A lot of the women that I've talked with had very, very different experiences from the experience I had. And I think, I've always been fortunate to be at the top of the pile in so many ways in terms of perceptions. I'm an Indian male from a top engineering college. And in that way, like pretty sort of from a well-off middle-class family. And in that way, sort of anyone I talk to, any group I talk to, I get some respect. I think if you look at people from different contexts, maybe different gender, different sort of family background that has given them maybe different skills and not the sort of skills I had, I think they often felt alienated, they felt marginalized, they felt that people were judging them for being different from who they themselves were. And I think that's one of the tragedies, that right, if you have a bunch of people from IITs and IIMs, if you're not from that stream, you sort of can get left out. And remember, even in the beginning, right, as we joined, the people from the IITs were placed on projects sort of from day one. Because the staffing used to often happen from demand from the manager of the team, right? So if there's a team, they would demand that, okay, we have these profiles in front of us, we'll get these people. But people from the IITs were picked up day one, and other people who were at least as good as the people from the IITs sort of were on the bench for 2 weeks or for a month, right? So all of these things were in play, and sort of it's hard to think of solutions, but I think especially on the gender part, that should be like easy to do if you really want to do it. I think from the academic sort of background part, they were trying to do it. So I think attempts are being done, but still some way to go.
Yeah, I think that's where it gets really interesting, right? Yeah. Because if whatever the manager is asking for, the HR person cannot go and say that, no, I will not give you X, I'll give you Y. But I think that's where the company has to, or any company, this is obviously not restricted to one sector, has to say that, okay, these are our policies and recommendations. And let's also experiment and see. Yeah.
And I think that's where sort of you have to put your money where your mouth is, right? Yeah. In the beginning. And this is something that, to be very honest, right, I've even seen at when I was at Pratham, right? When I was hiring. And I've always sort of...
I'll tell you an interesting story about that, but
sure.
But please go ahead. Yeah.
So I've always prided myself on, being this very liberal person who would try their absolute best that, would always be unbiased, right? Like, so whether a person from a particular religion or a particular gender would make sure that, to have a diverse team, all of that. And I remember like 1.5 years or so when I was sort of in charge, had no one else to, like, I can't sort of pass the blame on anyone else, right? I had full autonomy of who I wanted to hire in my team. Somebody pointed out to me that, there aren't any Muslims in your team. And why are there not any Muslims?
Which year was this?
This was around 2016.
Oh, so this was pre-business school hiring.
This is pre-business school hiring. And I was at Pratham for around 4 years.
Somebody who's joining you right now is from Network Capital Premium.
Okay.
We'll discuss that.
Great. Yeah. So, that was a shock to me. And I tried to rationalize it. And I said, we don't get many applicants somehow who are Muslim. And I think that then really struck home, right? That, again, what is my responsibility? Is it just to say that if people are not applying, I should not even bother to try and get somebody from that perspective on? Because often in communities, right, like if some people from a particular segment are in your team, then they will refer more people and those people will apply and those people will come into your team. So if you excluded some sort of segment from the beginning, then the chances of them coming in later, unless you make conscious effort to maybe go to particular colleges or to reach out to particular people or to particular academic backgrounds, you're not really going to get in a diverse pool of candidates. And I think at that point, then sort of, since then I've been trying to make a much more conscious effort that can I actually really make a diverse team, get people to grow. And I think that's the sort of thing that any big employer or small employer would have to do. And I think those things fundamentally right now, intrinsically, managers don't believe this. Managers don't believe that they should do this, that they should make this sort of effort. And I think the only way of making it happen is by surrounding, how the world is changing is by women and people of different religions and different castes and different communities becoming much more integrated with everyone else. And so you understand in a much more personal level that this is important. When my wife complains of the issues that she had at consulting firms and of the challenges she faced, then that's when I understand that when I was sort of having a fun time and a gala time, there were a lot of people who were not having the same experience I was.
Yeah.
And I think that really sort of opens your eyes a lot more.
And a lot of it becomes clear in retrospect, right? Because you both went to same college, very similar career trajectories.
Yeah.
And maybe looking back, she has the clarity which while she was going through, maybe it was harder to see.
Absolutely.
So 2 years finished at McKinsey, good learning.
Correct.
Then you decided to join Pratham, I gather.
That's right.
You were clear that you wanted to get into the social space, which you did, but there are many ways to enter this space.
Yeah.
So how did you go about choosing it, and how were the 2 years roughly at Pratham?
Yeah. That's a good question, and I actually spent a couple of months, 3 or 4 months actually, just doing a 360-degree sort of survey of the social impact space. This was a big move for me, and I was trying to figure out, what is going to be the best way for me to sort of learn things, make sure that I'm able to have an impact. And many people go into policy organizations, many people go into funding organizations, and those are two of the very standard paths. And especially from McKinsey, that's where most people are going. So you would go into a Gates Foundation, you would go into an international agency like the World Bank or something, right? For me, choosing to go to something like a Pratham, I think was sort of part of my intrinsic sort of desire, which was always, can I actually help in solving the major issue at hand? And I felt the issue was that how to sort of educate kids, how to at scale, and how to help kids get basic literacy, numeracy, or how to help youth become employable and start earning livelihoods is something that's not been solved. So if you don't know the solution, then how are you going to fund something that's going to make it happen, or how are you going to advocate for policy that's going to make a change? So for me, I think going into an implementation organization was important from that point of view. And I think that's how I started thinking about these things. At that time, I also had a pretty romantic view of sort of implementation, of being on the field, of understanding, what really are the challenges from the ground up. And I think that romantic view worked out for me. I think being at the top level sort of and hearing secondhand from folks or working or funding organizations that are working gives you some perspective, and it's important perspective. But really like managing programs, seeing how to scale them, seeing what are the challenges of working in an organization where maybe all your staff are low income themselves, are from a particular educational background themselves. I think that gives you a very different sort of perspective.
Right. That's amazing. So 2 years you did at Pratham?
I did around 3.5 years at Pratham.
Oh, so 2 years McKinsey?
2 years McKinsey,
and
3 years at
3.5.
Pratham or so. So I went into Harvard with around 5 years of experience.
5 years of experience. Tell me, when did you apply it? When did you think of business school?
Yeah.
Or was there always a plan?
It's an interesting story. I think it was always a plan, and then it became not the plan, and then it became the plan again.
I think that's so interesting to hear. And there's a reason that I'm asking you.
Sure.
Because many people try and put something social because it looks good on the CV and makes for a good essay. But for you, it's very clear that you always cared about this space.
Yeah.
So walk us through this MBA, not MBA journey.
Yeah, so I think when I was still back in undergrad, and at that point you still sort of tend to be influenced, you're not very clear on what you really want to do, to be honest. And so then it was very appealing, so I thought of the Harvard Business School 2+2 program. And the idea was, that let me just apply, then I'll be relaxed, I can do whatever I like. And then I sort of applied, I got through to the interview, and then didn't get an offer at that point. And obviously I was quite irritated, but luckily sort of got through to McKinsey, had a sort of good career, and then went into social impact. At that point, I finally decided, now this is it. I have done a lot of brand building. I have been to sort of good colleges, good work. Now let me just focus on doing something that I'm really passionate about, which is social impact, and forget all this MBA business, which for me is, at that point, was just about sort of extending my brand further, right? It was sort of just another fail-safe option, just another sort of...
Insurance policy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just another insurance policy. So I was like, how many insurance policies do I need?
Yeah.
So I went into Pratham saying that I'm not going to go to business school or policy school. I'm going to just sort of build a really impactful model and scale it. And then I did that for 2 years, never thinking about business school. And then in the third year, there were a number of reasons why sort of I started thinking about business school again. And I think one part of it was that the more I worked at Pratham, the more I started thinking about, in fact, there's something that you of course work a lot in, think about the future of work, the future of education. how will this work? So at that point, I was heading a program at Pratham that worked on vocational training. We were training around 25,000 youth to get skills and get jobs, very large budgets. We had a team of around 1,200 people, and I had the opportunity to lead that, which is something that I had never imagined I would have, to be very honest. But at the same time, I could see that I was sort of still wondering, is there a way to sort of capture kids young and to prepare them for a workforce that may look very different from the workforce for which I'm training youth in now, and what is the part to go there? So I think just trying to figure that out was quite hard. And so thinking that, let me see if I can sort of step out of my sort of bubble that I've been in for some time, right? Focusing on a particular project and start thinking a little bit more on fundamentally what education is, how can we sort of improve that, take 2 years out and sort of introspect a little bit more on that. I think that was a big sort of thing, and for me the MBA was a way to introspect in a guilt-free way. Nobody's telling me that you're just bumming around on the beach. You're doing your MBA and you're thinking at the same time. So that sort of was a big thing for me. And then the other thing was brand and networks. I think over time I sort of realized the importance of sort of building a personal brand and how that can really sort of amplify your leverage. And I think building my brand at some point coming from a fairly low-key family was something that was quite anathemic to me. It sort of talked about promoting yourself. I mean, the connotation I had of brand building was promoting yourself, putting yourself out there, sort of bragging about yourself. But I think over time I saw that, brand building and sort of having networks is going to be crucial in this sort of sector, especially where a lot of the leaders are people who have come from the corporate sector or who have been there for 30 years. So at 25, if I want to be looked upon, or at 30, if I want to be looked upon at a par with people who have worked in the sector for 20 years, or who have sort of maybe worked at Google for 15 years or Microsoft for 15 years and have come from there, maybe I need some more strings to my bow. And so I think the brand and networking of it was a big part of it. So brand, networking, getting some time out to really think about things, those were the things I went in for. I think I emerged with a lot more later, which I never anticipated I would. But at least I knew that I would go in and at least get these basic minimum things.
Yeah, always the whole aspects like networking and all are considered very weird in middle class Indian families or in many other parts of the world as well. However, we live in a networked world, and on Network Capital Premium we study these mental models one a day.
Sure.
So the one that we studied 2 days back was there are 3 things that you need to do in order to make exponential impact in anything. One is that you need to find what you are distinguished at. Like everyone is great at something. I think intelligence is a discovery problem.
Sure.
Then you have to get really, really, really good at that.
Right.
And third, that you have to tell loads of people about what you're doing so that you can discover points of collaboration. And you can't do anything without it. Edison, Einstein, all of them were exponentially good at all of these three things. So completely agree.
I think you're absolutely right. And for a long time, I think I was become really good at what you're sort of doing, and then people will come to you. And I think it took some time to figure out that this is a little naive. People will come to you, but you have to make yourself available to them.
Yeah.
People have to know what you know. People have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And without that, doesn't happen. Right? And I think, again, 2 concepts at HBS. I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but because we're on such an interesting sort of topic, still stay in my mind. I think one concept is sort of a framework that we learned on how to create impact, social or otherwise. That is sort of, you can be 3 things. You can be an agitator, you can be an innovator, and you can be an orchestrator. So you can sort of call attention to a problem.
Love it. Yeah.
Then you can innovate to solve the problem, and then you can orchestrate these large scale sort of collaborations or sort of these groups which will help to solve the solution. And for me, it was really about figuring out that I do want to be on the innovator side, but if I just innovate and I'm not on the orchestrator side, then it's probably quite worthless to innovate. And there are a lot of people who have innovated small solutions, but really figuring out how to make that happen at a country of India's size or the world size is a big thing. So that was one concept that's really stuck in my mind. And I think the other thing is something about being a tri-sector athlete. And that's something that I'm sure you would have heard of, that if you really want to create change, there are 3 major sectors for change. There's a private sector, there's a public sector, and there's a civil society sector. And what the world probably needs right now are people who can play across these 3.
Yeah.
And that's how I sort of look at some of my career going forward. I want to spend, say, 20 years of my life, and I won't look beyond 20 because who knows, but 20 years trying to sort of change education in India. Right now I'm working in civil society, and it's powerful, it's exciting, and I'm hoping to come up with some great solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But 10 years later, the government of India is starting lateral entry. If I get a chance to come into government at a senior role and really sort of try to expand this and strengthen this, that would be something I would love to do. And so not just working with government right now, but working in a government capacity, or then maybe going to the private sector and seeing how to sort of use the capacity of the private sector in terms of maybe the technology, maybe the know-how to really build this up, right? So I think that's also a way that I think people in the social impact sector should think of how they can really build up their skills.
Absolutely. In fact, even governments around the world are changing. I'm not saying for the good or for the bad, but like leaving politics aside, there are many organizations which are, say, Niti Aayog in India or, say, White House Fellowship in other parts, which give young professionals who've done well with their life, come and work in the government for some time. And then feel free to do whatever they like. So yeah, I love both of these frameworks. In fact, in the show notes, I'll probably put that and people would... really benefit from it. So you decided to, just jumping back again.
Yes.
So applying to business school, I'm assuming Gmat would not have been a big problem for you. Quantitative skills would have been up to the mark. And, but did you prepare at all for Gmat?
I did prepare for the Gmat. Gmat was not a problem for me. I do okay at sort of standardized tests. So I spent a little bit of time just doing some practice tests and all of that, right? Doing some of the problems and seeing where I had some issues and doing some of the problems.
And like consulting, it's not a boring preparation, right? It's just like simple math, basic English.
And math is sort of class, sort of school level math, and sort of other than that, it's comprehension. So it's a fun process, right? And in general, I think Gmat was fun, and so was the rest of the process. I actually did enjoy. I remember I rolled my eyes. I read somewhere that business school prep is actually helps you figure out your life or something. And I sort of rolled my eyes a lot. Like, if you haven't figured out your life till now, then I don't think business school prep is going to really help you too much on that. But I thought there was a sort of kernel of truth to that.
Really?
Eventually.
Tell us more. I agree with you, by the way. I think just the applying process if you do it honestly, you learn a lot about yourself. Because that's actually the first time you think about questions like what matters to you most and why. Why did you do what you do? It's interesting, but curious to hear your reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the sort of introspection you have to do, right, to try and sort of figure out in your essay some of these sorts of things, it helps you get clarity. So, for example, one of the things that helped me get clarity on was what did I really enjoy about my time at Pratham? What did I really like? Why did I want to do it? And I think that was part of sort of my essay, right, so to say. Another thing that helped me figure out was what do I want to do in the long term? And I knew it was social impact. I'd been heading this massive vocational training program for a long time. But what is the path forward? Is this something I want to continue doing? And even after business school, do I want to sort of start a company of my own? Do I want to sort of go into a large company? What exactly do I want to do, right? And I think many people sort of write a story that they feel that the applications officer wants them to answer. So you write something that is going to be like, that you feel is not going to be sort of unsafe, people will generally want it, and so you put that down. But I think for me, I always wanted to be quite honest. And for me, the lucky thing was that business school was not the end all and be all. Not the be all and end all. It wasn't as if I was
dying to
go. I was actually I thought doing quite well, and I would have, if I hadn't sort of gone to some of the places that I had in mind, I would have continued on. So for me, it was, let me be honest, let me figure out what I really want to do, let me put that down, and then if the business school feels that they can help me with this and that I'm a good candidate for them, then I should go. Otherwise, that's fine. And I think that helped me really figure out, for example, what I loved about the work I was doing. Therefore, what did I want to do in the future? Therefore, sort of, what are the next steps for me after business school for which I should prepare during business school?
Yeah. I want to ask this question. Feel free to not answer, by the way, because one shouldn't reveal too much about what they wrote in the application. But what you wrote in the application about what you want to do, is it very different from what you are doing today? If yes, tell us. If not, don't tell us.
It's actually exactly the same as I wrote.
This is very uncommon, by the way.
I have seen that people sort of change what they do, and I think often it's because people are figuring themselves out.
You know Richard Thaler, right? The Nobel,
yes, of course,
the
nudge guy.
So he makes a lot of fun of MBA applicants, by the way. So he has, I know how these applications work.
Right.
He's on record saying that, they'll put in something in Africa and then they go and work in, this industry, this space. He makes a lot of fun and he says it in a much more eloquent way than I did.
Yeah.
But yes, so tell us about what you wrote and what you're doing today.
So what I wrote was that when I finished off my MBA, I want to come back to a leading development sector organization. And I mentioned, in fact, that Pratham is something that is going to be that is a very probable choice. Lead and sort of develop and lead large-scale programs there. And so that's what I want to do. And in the long term, I want to be someone who's sort of seen as the visionary in the education space, someone who's come up, developed things, scaled things, and sort of is impacting education in India in a big way. Both at the policy levels, but also at the implementer level. And I always mention that in education, I feel for me, the route to impact is through an implementer going to policy, rather than a policy maker through and through, or a policy maker going to government. So I actually wrote this word for word, and I hesitated a lot before I put that in. Because some of my friends and advisors or sort of mentors told me that, this may not be sexy enough. Right? Like people want you to, the application committee may want you to say
tell a more interesting story or tell...
like say that you start your own organization or spell out this really cool model that
or throw in AI somewhere.
Throw in AI, throw in future of work. So throw in, AI, throw in all the buzzwords, right? So I was a little confused at that point, right? So the idea was that, I think that, of course, like tech and all of that is going to be a big part of the solution, but I know many other things like social sort of community and all of that is going to be a big part as well. So what do I do? And then again, because I had relatively less to lose, I didn't care so much. I decided that I'd be honest and I'd go with this. In fact, I had a really good conversation with my interviewer, where I was very clear as well that, there's a very good chance that I'll go back to Pratham. I'm continuing to engage with them because I enjoy the work, I enjoy the organization, the leadership. And I think they're doing the most impactful work that there is to do in this space right now. And that's where I'm sort of suited to create a lot of impact. And I think to their credit, and despite all the sort of cliches you hear from admissions consultants and others, they were very open to that. And I think they appreciated that. So that worked out, I think, quite well for me.
No, that's amazing and so refreshing to hear.
Thank you.
That schools are giving people a chance, because nothing is as honest as an honest story.
Yeah.
I think if you're going through a dilemma, which most people are
Absolutely.
in your early mid-20s, early 20s, late 20s.
Absolutely.
If you articulate the reason and rationale, everyone will give you a chance. Where things go crazy is when people give a perfect vision without the backing.
Absolutely.
Or vice versa.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I think so many people sort of have worked, do X years, sort of 5 years at McKinsey, and then suddenly they write in their essay that they will go to Africa, right, and do something entirely else.
Yeah, you have to. I'll send you the link of this Richard Teller
article.
So, it's a video.
Yeah.
Before pre-Nobel Prize video. It's hilarious.
Sure.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think a lot of my friends, very close friends, have changed what they're doing, and I think that business school is a process of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process of sort of figuring out what you want to do. And I was given the advice, and I did follow it as well, of exploring many other things. So,
but did you?
I continued engaging with Pratham very closely. I continued being involved, helping out in different things. At the same time, I talked to many different organizations and people to pick their brains.
Yeah.
So this wasn't with sort of context to a job. That sort of I'd already discussed that I would come back to Pratham, but it was definitely with the view of broadening my horizons and seeing what is out there in terms of models people are building, innovative things people are doing, because there are people doing great things out there. I spent the summer in the US doing edtech work as a product manager. Again, something quite different from me, and I felt that so for me, I didn't want to go into Google and work on Google search because that's very different, but I felt working on an education technology product and seeing sort of how they're helping kids learn, that's something that's very relevant.
Right.
So I think I broadened my horizons a lot in that way, while at the same time sticking true to what I felt would be good in terms of what I wanted to do later. But I think that evaluation was there, and I think to Pratham's credit, they had actually always told me that take a call on this later. Like come back like 2 years later, you decide what you want to do. We're not going to hold you to anything right now. And I think if you can come up with that sort of understanding with an organization, I think that's probably a good way to go to business school. If you're going to come back to an organization, and many people do, whether to consulting or to somewhere else, make sure that sort of you have the flexibility to think outside and at least are able to pick up a lot of other things.
Right. Yeah. Get the best to this area that you care a lot about.
Absolutely.
Again, like this is a question that you need not answer, but
Sure.
how about finances? Did that cross your mind?
It definitely did. I think that was a big part of why originally I had decided not to do an MBA, because often if you do an MBA, then you spend a few years paying it off. So you spend the 2 years of your MBA, and then you spend maybe 5 years, 3 years, 4 years paying it off. And for me,
But I haven't heard of too many people take less than 3 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I think people, so people spend at least you take 5 years, right?
Yeah.
In this whole sort of journey of sort of getting done with your loans and all of that. And for me, the time when I could take the greatest risk, where I could have the freshest thoughts, could make the biggest impact, would be right after business school. I didn't want to spend sort of 3 years out doing something that I wasn't
Paying for
passionate
your
about.
insurance.
Paying for my, exactly. So yeah, I didn't want to pay for my insurance, and I think that's always been in my mind, actually, to be honest. Like, people have always said that why don't you go to the corporate sector, spend 10 years, make partner, make CXO, whatever, and then come back and your sort of ability will be 10x to do what you like as opposed to what you are doing now.
Right.
And for me, always one of the phrases that sticks into my mind is that, sort of the discount rate on life is very high. So basically in your life, if you are sort of the day tomorrow or today is sort of much more important than some years down the road.
Yeah.
And if you're unhappy now or tomorrow, then that's not worth it for something that may happen sometime in the future. So my mind was always that. So
that's such a great mental model. We'll do that over the weekend.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. This was said by actually I copied it from the founder of Careem, the Middle Eastern Uber, and it resonated with me in terms of sort of how I felt about life. But yeah, so I think in terms of finances, what worked out was I started exploring a little bit more to see is there a way that I can actually avoid paying for the insurance, and then it turned out that some of the business schools in the US and some of the policy schools as well, including Harvard, have programs where they will pay for the insurance. So they realize that people from the social impact space haven't earned too much, and they haven't. I had taken a sort of 80% pay cut when I had moved from McKinsey to Pratham. So they don't have too many savings, and later if they want to come back into the same space, it's not going to be possible. So Harvard at least had a loan repayment assistance program. That program helps you to repay your loan if you go into the social impact space after graduating.
Right.
So for example, now I've come back into Pratham. I'm earning a compensation that is below, say, a market salary or a salary that I might have earned if I had gone into some other sort of industry. So HBS is actually helping me pay back that loan.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that...
When you say helping me, is it like partly paying it off?
Yeah, so they give me a grant every year while I work in the social impact space for up to 10 years to pay off my loan in that year. So for example, this year, suppose I have my installment for the loan is around $10,000.
Right.
They will give me that grant of $10,000, which I can use to pay back the loan.
Yeah. I think it's such an important policy. Yeah. Otherwise, I just feel that social sector, brilliant people are just underpaid and then end up either, just not investing enough in themselves to become better professionals. Absolutely. Or just like living in a compromised state.
Absolutely. And I think the social sector needs to pull its socks up. And in the US it has to some extent, but in India as well, to realize that if you want to get the best talent, you have to pay somewhat competitive salaries at least. Yeah. And it's beginning to happen a bit.
Yeah.
So
thankfully, even in the government.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I think government, again, it's critical. I mean, I've always been horrified in the government, and my parents are both in the government, right, and pretty senior, sort of now at very senior levels. And I remember that, to be honest, what I sort of earned 1 or 2 years into sort of my consulting life
probably
was what they're earning at the end of their careers.
Yeah.
And they are from the best colleges in India and have the best academic background and could have been doing anything they liked, to be very honest, right? And I think much brighter than I am. So from that perspective, I always felt that, the government right now loses talent. Because you have so many of these jobs available now in the private sector, and I think they are now changing the models, at least especially in terms of lateral entry, getting in specialists and experts and so on sort of higher.
And also, I think there are some pay commissions which have increased the base salary. Just the last section of the interview. So today, what does a day in your life looks like? You've come back from HBS, you joined Pratham. In what capacity have you joined, and how do you spend your hours at work?
Yeah. So I've come back to Pratham as the National Head of Strategic Initiatives. So my role there sort of covers a range of things. On one front, one of the sort of major initiatives I'm leading is on how can we use technology across all aspects of Pratham, and especially to aid student learning. So I think what we're seeing is that more and more in India, with the data revolution and the mobile revolution, technology is becoming a tool to help kids learn. This is sort of more prevalent right now at the Baiju segment, which is sort of the top 10-20% of the population. But even for the bottom 40%, technology should be a popular enabler. And we have some very interesting models where we are working in sort of community groups with groups of kids getting tablets and accessing content and doing sort of activities both on the tablet and outside. So we are trying to spread that. Pratham works right now with around 6 to 7 million kids every year through government partnerships or directly. And we are trying to see how we can use technology to really accelerate learning for these kids between grades 1 to 8. So that's one part of my mandate, to help sort of spread the innovation that we're developing in technology across Pratham. The other thing that I'm doing is, again, in terms of helping and strengthening Pratham as we are scaling up. Pratham sort of is one of India's largest non-profits, is well known for the ASER survey on the policy side, for its sort of pedagogic and sort of innovation models for primary education. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we have sort of doubled in sort of size, in scale, in numbers. And there it's a very simple problem of how do you scale an organization in terms of looking at things like finances or people or processes. And institutionalizing sort of a non-profit, which has worked as a movement always, into something that is going to be there for the long term and making impact for the long term. So I'm heavily involved with our functions on finance, on people, to help scale some of that up.
Right. And a day in your life?
Yes, sorry, I forgot to answer the question. So a day in my life. So I think if I was to look at it, right, what I'm doing right now, some part of my day may go into sort of monitoring and figuring out what our, say, digital program is doing. So looking at sort of what are the latest results to come in from the field, from the 100,000 kids who are sort of using the tablets, looking at some of the data, suggesting innovations to our field teams, even getting to the level of suggesting trainings that can be done and so on. So getting into it very operationally even, but looking also at a high level at that. So that's one part of it. The second part may be looking at a $35 million organization and trying to figure out how our finances are looking, what the working capital flow is going to be like. And the third part may be in the evenings, maybe looking at, we have 6,000 employees now across Pratham at different levels.
That's so impressive.
Yes, so it's one of the largest organizations, but with these 6,000 people, sort of how do we make sure that they're getting more and more effective all the time and are able to help these 6 million kids that they're reaching. And so really figuring out the culture part of it, the organization part of it, the capacity part of it. So I think all of these things are happening, and for me, a large part of sort of the role that I'm doing now is working across functions, working with the CEO, working with sort of the heads of, say, finance, heads of people, heads of digital, to really drive what the organization should be going sort of further on, along with the long-term sort of strategy and vision, in line with the strategy and vision of the organization. So I think that's the challenge for non-profits in India today. Often, sort of the system is becoming mature, and we have to figure out how the organization sort of can grow in line with that growing scope.
No, absolutely. I mean, we just need more people like you to commit to their mission and do things that they truly care about. Azeez, this has been a delight. Thank you so much for your time. And we got to do a follow-up now with Shruti and see how many, because both of you have so many shared experiences. We'd love to have her as well and do a follow-up with you 1 year from now.
Oh, that would be wonderful, Utkarsh. Yeah, I'd be very happy to. And Shruti is doing she's gone the startup route and doing the exciting startup, sort of living the exciting startup life. So I think both of us sort of would be happy to come back at any point and sort of chat with you.
No, I briefly spoke with her about the thing that she's building. It'll be great to have her. But again, thank you so much. And also Shruti is not here, but thank you to her as well. She's been an integral part of the building of the community that we are seeing on NC. Thanks.
Yeah, we're both big fans. So
cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.